Hart, and I'm at Packard Museum in Warren, Ohio. This is the Kristal Hart Show.
Hi, I'm Kristal Hart. Welcome to the Kristal Hart Show. We are at the Packard Museum in Warren, Ohio. With us is the director, Mary Ann Porinchak. Also with us, Cecilia Hart. Do you have a question?
I forgot it. It's on.
Well, Mary Ann's going to fill us in on this evening.
Tonight's event was a fundraiser for the National Packard Museum. As a nonprofit, that is one of our primary focuses annually, to raise that $250,000 we need to operate, and to do that we have to have fundraisers. So this one was a really cool theatrical presentation where we had a cast of 7 people that were first-person enactors of Packard family members, and they told scandalous stories, the kind of stories that you really don't present in a regular program but are so much fun. And they all happened from 1900 to the late 1920s, so it was really great to have people dressed. All the guests came dressed in 20s attire, and we just presented all those great scandalous stories that were from the society pages, and it was in a setting as if we were in Bess Packard's living room. So it was lots of fun.
And this is the Packard Museum. It's located in Warren, Ohio, and tell them about all the different cars.
We have cars from 1900 to 1956 here. We are open noon to 5 Tuesday through Saturday, 1 to 5 on Sunday, and we have regular programming throughout the year. So if you're in the area, you must come to the museum and check us out. You won't be disappointed.
Mayo Franklin, can you tell us about the Packard Museum?
Yes, I can, Miss Hart, and thank you for interviewing me. It's the best interview I've had all year. And I want to tell you, this collection of great Packard classical cars is known all over the United States. And we're just blessed to have a board of directors at the Packard Museum who gives functions like this where we can learn history, look at this great collection of cars, and let the whole community know what we have in our own backyard. So it's very exciting to know the history that I learned tonight. I happen to live in work in the Perkins Mansion, but I never knew about the marriage proposal between the Perkins family and the Packard family until tonight. So it's great to have this kind of experience, and you're doing a great job as well. And thank you so much for your interview.
We're here at the Packard Museum, and this is the Packard family and some of the scandals and stories. And who do we have here?
Well, I'm Judge Gilmer, Thomas Gilmer, and I handled a lot of the legal problems and a lot of the estates for some of the well-to-do in Warren, including the Packards and the Adams and the Page.
And here in Warren, Ohio, for our audience, the Packards, tell them about the cars, that the Packard cars were started right here in Warren, Ohio.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about it, the Packard family and the Packard Motor Company back in those early years of automobile manufacturing, and then later on Packard Electric, really it helped put Warren on the map, because even today there's thousands of residents here who are retirees from Packard Electric.
And we have some of the Packard cars behind us. At this museum, you can come and see all this fine work.
Oh yeah, we have some really significant Packards here. We just recently received the 7-passenger limousine that was in Washington, D.C. and was used in 3 or 4 of the presidential inauguration parades. And last year we also acquired the Howard Hughes Packard convertible that he gave to his fiancee, Jean Peters, back in the day. And so we have that right here, too.
Oh, yeah, and she didn't like that one, did she?
She didn't drive it much.
It's the pink and white one, because I took a picture in it once. We love it.
Yeah, she didn't drive it a lot, so you can look at it and see it's the really original condition, just the way it came out of the factory.
And tonight they are having a little fundraiser, and your character hasn't come up yet, has it? Or
No, not yet. I'm up next, though.
you're up
Yeah, we're
next,
gonna-
and just tell us a little bit about your scandal, and you're helping out of some of the scandals.
Yeah. Yes, actually, I'm going to be talking about the fact that the grandfather gave the family a little bit of a black eye because he was a partner in a major construction company that was actually building the aqueducts for New York City to bring the drinking water to New York City. But he fell on some financial trouble and eventually embezzled quite a bit of money. And to escape that scandal and prosecution, he went to Buenos Aires and stayed in Buenos Aires until he could get enough money to make restitution and pay all that money back. Never went to prison, though.
Is that because of you by any chance?
No, no. Maybe because he was just rich enough to keep it out of the headlines.
Well, we can't wait to see your performance.
Oh, thank you. It'll be
Thank
fun.
you. Here at the Packard Museum, now we have another character. This is all about the Packard family and some of the stories that circulated.
Well, I am Bess Packard, and you are at my party. It's a cocktail party of about 1929. My husband passed away last year, so this is my first gathering of friends and family, and we are having a little bit of a gossip sessions at different times. So J.W. Ward, that I called him, and Bess were married. We were married later in life in 1904, and we have no children, but he was very studious and very smart, and he has 40 patents to his name. But he was very, very shy, very introverted, unlike his brother Will, who was very outgoing. They were just totally opposite, but best friends all the way around. So.
And the Packard family, it was socialites, the elite of the area. As we said before, the Packard car. So
Yes.
much in this area, the development.
Well, the Packard brothers first started, their business was making lamps, which if you're in the business, they're lamps. I call them light bulbs. And that part of that business became part of General Electric that employed a lot of people here in Warren. Their second business that they developed was Packard Electric, which was the wiring for the automobiles. My husband invented a coating for the wiring because that was the problem with a lot of early cars was the wiring, and they would short out or wouldn't run properly. Well, he invented a coating for it, which is why the Packard automobile was one of the best on the road. So not only did they have the light bulb factory and the car factory, they also had the wiring factory. So they were very, very prevalent in hiring a lot of people in Warren.
And was it a happy marriage?
Oh yes, oh yes.
Oh, that's
It
nice.
was very, very happy. We had our summer home on Lake Chautauqua in Lakewood, New York. It was a beautiful home that he built for me up there. And then the one this home on Oak Knoll was also one that we designed ourselves. So.
We are here with Cornelia Wade Hall. Now tell us your role in this performance.
Well, I'm the granddaughter of the man who founded Poland, so I come from money. I live here on Millionaires Row, across the street from the Kinsmans, and I'm the youngest of 7 brothers and sisters. And in time, I become the only member of my family to inherit all of the wealth. But I'm a little snotty, coming from that aristocrat background. And although I'm best friends with Bess, who is hosting the party here, I just kind of really like to gossip. I like being mentioned, and ideally, I just like to fashion myself with the finest. And tonight, I tell the story of my cousin, Kirtland Fitch, who embezzled money from the Second National Bank and then dressed as a woman to run off to Boston until he was finally brought back to Warren and trialed and sentenced to prison for 5 years.
And Second National Bank is a big bank in Warren, Ohio. And what happened to him while he was in prison?
Well, actually, he was a very charming fellow, and he became close friends with the warden. So they would go out cruising around town, and the prison also lent him a rig, so that he could take a lady out on a date.
So this is a very colorful group of people.
As I joked with my character before, you can't keep a rich man down.
With us is Nina Erickson, the maid. Now tell me a few stories.
Well, the biggest stories is that Bess Packard, really didn't like her sister Carlotta. And in her diary, she wrote many mean things about Carlotta. And the one that made her the most happy was when Carlotta got fined, and it was in the newspaper that she had her dog run unmuzzled in Central Park and was to have bitten up to 72 people. Now, it was a little tiny dog, and it probably maybe didn't really bite that many, but it's in the diary, and Bess had a good laugh about that. Bess was very cerebral, educated, and her sister-in-law Carlotta went to finishing school. So they were very different people, and they really didn't like each other, especially when Bess married Carlotta's brother. So then we used a lot of inserts from Bess's actual diary to tell the story of her dislike for her sister-in-law.
Well, and that part, you said Central Park, so at this point they were in New York City?
Only Carlotta was. Carlotta was, after Bess and J.W. got married, Bess moved to New York City and was a Manhattan socialite. That's when that happened. Oh. But it made the Warren papers.
It made the Warren papers.
It made national newspaper, but it made the Warren papers.
And I'm Kristal Hart.
And I'm Cecilia Hart.
And we've been at the National Packard Museum in Warren, Ohio.
And this is all the time we got, folks. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show. Bye. We're at the National Packard Museum in Warren, Ohio, and I hear there's a new exhibit on display.
So let's go inside. Hi, I'm Cecilia Hart, and we're at the National Packard Museum in Warren, Ohio.
And I'm Kristal Hart, once again, the National Packard Museum in Warren, Ohio. The room we are in now are the original cars that were built here in Warren, Ohio from 1899 to 1903, but we are here for a new exhibit, which is the Jesse Vincent exhibit. With us is Charles Olin, who will now explain a little bit about first Warren, Ohio and the Packard, and a little bit about Jesse Vincent. Charles is the head of the education department here at the National Packard Museum.
So in front of you we have a 1900 Packard Model B. This is the second oldest Packard that survives. It was the 10th vehicle built here in Warren in 1900, and it was sold new to George Blackmore, who was a merchant in Painesville, Ohio. And it's interesting to imagine, too, is that he came to Warren to buy the vehicle, and they had to send a mechanic back with him just to teach him how to drive, because no one knew how to drive, no one knew how to maintain a vehicle back then. So, yeah, this car was, again, owned by George Blackmore, and in the 1970s, George's son was an elderly man at the time, and he sold the remains of this vehicle to Terry Martin, who was the founder of the museum, and it took Terry several decades to restore this vehicle, and it's now on loan to the museum thanks to Howard Shavitz from New Jersey.
You know, I just want to say this area, Warren, Ohio, has a very rich history with the Packard family. But you were saying before, now we also have Packard Electric. You said Packard Electric actually was before the Packard Company?
Yes, Packard Electric. Yeah, Packard Electric Company was established in 1890, 9 years before the first Packard car was built, and their first product were incandescent lamps, which we call light bulbs today. And in 1899, the very first Packard car was built in a corner of the light bulb factory. It was made by the Packard and Weiss Partnership, which became the automobile department of the New York and Ohio Company. Then it became the Ohio Automobile Company. And then in 1902, the name of the company was changed to the Packard Motor Car Company.
And now, as we head towards the next room, now the next room is when the Packard Motor Company moved to Detroit, and Jesse Vincent now played a big role, a great role, maybe one of the finest engineers ever. Could you tell us a little bit about now this Jesse Vincent exhibit?
Our exhibit is in honor of Jesse Vincent. Again, he probably was the finest automotive engineer of all time. He was responsible for the first V12 engine, the Packard Twin 6. He was also, not only was an automotive engineer, he also developed both the Liberty and the Packard Merlin engines in World War I and World War II. He also developed marine engines. He was known for racing. He was a daredevil. He not only raced cars, he raced boats and airplanes, and he was quite the character. Jesse Vincent is one of the most important figures in Packard Motor Company history. He was the head of engineering from around 1915 until he retired in 1952, and he's responsible for most of the innovations that Packard was famous for during that era.
Yeah, that was my question. What made him such a dynamic personality in the engineering field?
Well, I think he was a genius. He was a mechanical genius, and he could look at something and figure out the way to make it better, make it simpler. You know, he was just a very gifted person, in engineering and an inventor.
And tell me, what years was he with the Packard Motor Company, or actually was it after Packard was here in Warren, Ohio, from 1899 to 1903?
Yes, Packard Motor Car Company moved to Detroit in the fall of 1903. Jesse Vincent was hired by Packard in 1912, and in 1915 he became the vice president of engineering, and he served in that capacity until 1952. And he actually was on the board of directors of Packard Motor Car Company until 1954. So he was there most of their history.
Now behind me, we have this...
It is a 1929 Vincent Speedster Recreation. It is a vehicle recreation of a vehicle that Jesse Vincent had specially made for him for testing out a new Speedster engine at the Packard Proving Grounds in the late 1920s. Yeah, this vehicle is again, it's a recreation done by Jerry Miskovich of Los Angeles, who is actually a Warren native, and the vehicle is now owned by Gordon Logan of Georgetown, Texas. And it took Jerry about 20 years to complete this project. And again, it's a recreation of a special vehicle that Jesse Vincent had made in the Packard shops and used for testing purposes at the Proving Grounds in suburban Detroit. And the car was actually really well known in Packard Motor Car Company, and a lot of some pretty important people were actually able to drive this car, including Charles Lindbergh.
Now tell me what made it so special.
Well, it's a one-of-a-kind race car. You know, it's just a low-slung, sleek car. You know, aerodynamic with a high-powered engine, special suspension. Again, everything about it is custom. The body, the interior. It's just a one-of-a-kind beauty.
Now, was he involved with racing? And I know there's a saying, win on Sunday, sell on Monday. Have you ever heard that saying?
Yes. Jesse himself was not a racer, but he was a daredevil. He was, not only did he race this vehicle, he also raced motorboats. He was a champion motorboat racer, and he also flew airplanes. So he was a bit of a daredevil.
Now, could you talk about Jesse Vincent's education?
And that's a really interesting story because he had very little formal education. He graduated from high school in Illinois, and he moved to St. Louis at age 17, and he took some courses at the YMCA and correspondence courses through. So he had no college education, no formal education at all, but again, the man was just a mechanical genius.
And how did he get involved with the military?
Actually, when he worked at Packard Motor Car Company, In 1916, then the winds of war were already spreading across the country, and Packard had made a decision that they would develop an aircraft engine for the military. And Jesse Vincent was put in charge of that project, and he developed what was known as the Liberty engine, used in World War I by the American forces. It was manufactured by not only by Packard Motor Car Company, but several other motor companies in Detroit and other areas. But Jesse Vincent was basically, he was the main driving force behind that project.
And did he go to the government to put this project together, or how did it come together?
Actually, Jesse Vincent resigned from Packard Motor Car Company when the U.S. entered World War I, and he was commissioned as an officer in the Army before there was an Air Force, and he was put in charge of the engineering for the United States Army during World War I until the war was over, and then he resigned from the military and returned to Packard Motor Car Company.
Okay. Now we have over here an engine, or tell me.
That's an aircraft engine. It's the 1944 Packard Merlin aircraft engine, and that's a really interesting story. Again, when World War II was approaching, the British government came to the United States and asked for help producing the Rolls-Royce Merlin aircraft engine, and Ford turned them down. Henry Ford, they first went to Henry Ford, and he declined to take on the project. So they went to Packard, knowing that their expertise with Jesse Vincent and his reputation for engineering, and they decided that they would accept that project. And Jesse Vincent started out by tearing apart the Rolls-Royce engine and just completely redrawing it, and he figured out a way to improve it and to mass produce it. And again, the Rolls-Royce engine made in England was basically hand assembled, but Jesse Vincent, he engineered a way that it could be mass produced, and each time that his changes made the engine more powerful. So it was a quite successful project, and they ended up being used by the United States and the British military. The B-15 Mustang is probably the most famous airplane that used the Rolls-Royce engine, or the Packard version of the Merlin Rolls-Royce engine, that is. And we also have on the exhibit 3 very detailed models of various Packard engines that Jesse Vincent had engineered at Packard.
What made him go to Packard?
That's a good question too. That actually he went to work for Burroughs Company in Detroit, and the president of Burroughs at the time was a gentleman by the name of Alvin McCauley, and Alvin McCauley then ended up being hired by Packard Motor Car Company. So Alvin McCauley recruited Jesse Vincent to come work for Packard. Also, part of our permanent collection is a PT boat engine, which is on loan from Detroit Historical Society and on permanent loan here. And this is another piece of the Jesse Vincent exhibit. It is back in the engine room because, as you can see, this thing is actually too big and too bulky to be able to move with the rest of the exhibit. But again, this is a really another important artifact in our collection, that the PT boat engines were another one that Jesse Vincent developed during World War II. And these powered the PT boats, and most famously, John F. Kennedy was a captain of PT 109. And again, there were 3 of these engines in that little plywood boat. So these boats could fly with these PT boat engines. And again, Jesse Vincent was responsible for the engineering and development of these important pieces of our military history.
Right behind me is a twin 6 engine. Now explain a little bit more.
In 1915, Jesse Vincent developed the first 12-cylinder engine, the famous Packard twin 6 engine. And it really cemented Packard's reputation as the leading luxury automobile company in the world. And Packard used the twin 6 engine from 1915 until 1939, when it was discontinued. This particular engine is a 1920 version of the twin 6, and it was restored and donated to the museum by Jim Brody's from Tucson, Arizona.
Did it make the cars or everything go faster? Or?
Oh, it was a very powerful engine. Yes, it did, and it's also extremely quiet too. So we have several cars in our collection with the Twin Six, and it's amazing that you can barely hear it when it's running. It's such a smooth engine. So this particular automobile is a 1939 Packard Twin Six touring sedan. And the significance of this automobile, again, it's the very last year of the Packard Twin Six engine. And at that time, Packard was really, as we were going out of the end of the Depression, before World War II, that they really had planned to expand into the middle market, and de-emphasize their top-of-the-line luxury cars. So a lot of automobile historians think that was an error, and you can look at how beautiful this car is, and it's a shame this is like the very end of an era right here. So in front of you is a 1937 Packard 12 2-4-passenger rumble seat Roadster, and this vehicle was produced again in 1937, which was a peak year for Packard production. And this car was just loaded with innovations and luxurious appointments. So some automotive historians consider this like the finest model of Packard's ever produced. And so Jesse Vincent's fingerprints are all over this vehicle, from its fine engineering, even though he wasn't in the head of styling, but he had a good eye, and so I'm sure that his input was even in the styling of this vehicle. This is one of the museum's more recent acquisitions. It's a 1948 Super 8 7-passenger sedan, and this particular car was used for decades by a hotel in Washington, D.C., Bellevue Hotel in Washington, and it was actually used in several of the presidential inaugural parades, including for President Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and Bill Clinton. And 1948 was the year right before Jesse Vincent had his very last patent, and his very last patent was an important one too. It was the Ultramatic automatic transmission, and Packard was it was the only one of the independent automakers that developed its own automatic transmission. It came with a great cost to Packard, but it was a really well designed and well engineered innovation that Packard had, and that was Jesse's very last patent.
And how long is the exhibit here?
The exhibit will be here through the beginning of next year, beginning of 2024.
So please come, Warren, Ohio, National Packard Museum. The address?
The address is 1899 Mahoning Avenue, Northwest, Warren, Ohio. We're located right next to the Packard Music Hall.
And I'm Kristal Hart.
And I'm Cecilia Hart.
And we've been at the National Packard Museum in Warren, Ohio.
And this is all the time we got, folks. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show.